Welcome back to the Suicide Prevention Show here on 1360 WLBK. We have a very special guest in the studio, and here to introduce that guest is Citizen Mike. Who do you got?
That's right,
Mike?
T.D. Ryan. Today we have Cheri Auman. She is a local psychotherapist and active member in our community. Welcome, Cheri.
Thanks. Great to be here.
And Cheri, you know, Michael, you've touched on it numerous times here. We're here to discuss suicide and suicide prevention, obviously, from both sides, the people contemplating suicide and survivors of people that have lost people to suicide. But you also mentioned that you want to talk to Cheri, and she's been gracious enough to come visit with us, about your personal feelings and your personal relationship with suicide and suicide prevention. And can we ask you about that, if that's not delving too deep?
Well, in my profession, to be a really good therapist, the belief is that this person is enough to handle their own problem. If I start treating the person like they need me to handle their problem, I'm teaching them to be dependent on me. So that's part of the whole guide of psychotherapy, and yet when you have a suicidal person in your office, it's a lot finer road to walk, you know. At what point do you intervene? And at what point do you let this person explore? And then when I shut the door and go home, you know, how well do I do that? I've had some clients I've worked with that are overseas, and so it's through email, and know that they're very suicidal, and I can feel it in my gut day in, day out.
So, Cheri, how well do you do that, and how do you go about doing that?
How well do I do that? It really depends on the number of suicide people I have at the moment. Okay. Right. Actually, I've been doing this for 30 years, so I do it better than the first 5 years I ever did therapy. But I know that there are some people that get to me, and I carry them home with me.
Right, so part of the piece here is connecting with another human being at a meaningful level. And even someone like yourself who's trained to do this, when you're dealing with such a deep, gut-wrenching experience, it's hard to take that and just kind of leave it at the office. It changes who you are, and you struggle with trying to do the best you can to serve that person.
Correct. Yes.
See, Mike is working on his questioning skills, because you need an open-ended question is what we're looking for. Well, let me ask you about in terms of when that person walks away from the office. We talked on the show numerous times about, and I have a friend in particular who would do that, would threaten to take his life as an intention getter. Well, you know, if you guys leave me alone, I'm going to go and do something drastic. And of course, obviously, you never would want to disregard that. But how can you tell that the level of somebody when they really are contemplating suicide, as opposed to just seeking attention? Or is it so interwound that it's impossible to decipher the two?
I think there are clearly some people who are in my office who have used suicide as an attention getter with their family, with their friends for years. The problem with that, though, is that they can make a mistake, that they can set it up and expect somebody to be home to intervene, and that person doesn't get home. So you always have a level, even with everybody. The farthest one over here, who you say they're just an attention getter, it still may happen. But it's the person who has been talked about it a few times and all of a sudden comes in my office and they're happy and everything's okay and the world's wonderful. That's the one that I make an active intervention for, because they've usually then set a date, their problems are over, they know they're going to be gone. So that's the other side of the coin, the person who is the most dangerous.
So, Cheri, can you give our listening audience some idea of what this person might look like? So are we going to be able to see them when we're walking down the street, or that person in the office, or is there kind of this hidden part of their life that we don't really see?
I think a suicidal person follows a whole range of personalities. So, yeah, some people are going to be giving you hints. You know, they're going to be actively talking about depression, talking about their struggle. And if you listen well and you let them lead you, you might get there. But there are a lot of people who aren't going to give you any hint. It's their own secret world. They don't talk about it. They don't put it out there.
So then part of the challenge for our audience is for those people that they care about in their environment that might be suffering. You know, how can they reach them out to them? What are they going to see? I mean, you can't see into their heads. What can they do?
Well, you can just plain ask them. I understand. I see depression. I hear that you're down. Do you consider suicide in that? Because when we ask a person, are you thinking about suicide, it takes away some of the mystique and the power. By not asking the question, people kind of get, it's more powerful. It's my secret. And so like even in my office, when I just talk about it as a fact, this is what you're thinking about, the power, the mystique leaves. We deal with the real ugly parts of what they're thinking about.
That's one of the myths we dispelled here on the show, is the fact that you can even use the word suicide when talking to somebody, and that's not going to trigger some mechanism to make them actually want to commit the act.
No, not at all. And if they say they're suicidal, I go in and ask, how are you planning it? To all the details. Now, if they give me a detailed plan out and they've got a date, then we're looking at something really serious.
What do you do then when they go that far with it, Cheri?
Well, then in my profession, I'm required to report them and do an intervention. Okay.
Good.
And we've also approached that subject as well, too. Yeah. But Cheri, I thought it was very interesting in your opening statement, which was wonderful, by the way, is the fact that you're not there to see, I can't say it the way you said it, but the fact is you want them to help themselves, essentially. But yet, we hear it all the time. People say, come on, pick yourself up by your bootstraps, toughen up, get through this, get over it, is an expression that we're trying to do away with on this show. But where is the fine line between somebody helping themselves and you providing that help without them becoming dependent on you?
Well, walking alongside of a person and constantly letting them know that those abilities to do this are within them. They're going to find them. I'll walk, I'll help them, we'll explore it together. But they're the ones who have the ability to learn how to deal with depression and pain and hurt, and not say, you have to come to me for the answer. So I'm just basically saying that answer's in you. We'll walk through to find it together.
And Tamara, let's bring you into this, because I always try to be sensitive. You and Chuck are so courageous to talk about your loss. But with Demetrius, do you feel that if he would have gotten the help or would have been able to talk to somebody like Cheri, things might have been different?
I wish I had had a program like this to listen to. When Demetrius stood there and said, Mom, I feel like this isn't my planet. I feel like I don't belong here. And I just stood there looking at him and said, wow. That's the only thing I could think to say. I was so taken aback by it. And I, again, didn't want to say anything that was going to make it worse for him, but didn't know what to say to be helpful. And I was stunned and hoped that the moment was going to pass.
Well, you're so on. I got the goosebumps. You say that she gives you goosebumps, Michael, and I got the goosebumps when you said that. And you said it the other show a couple of weeks ago, where you said that when Demetrius was yelling from the driveway that he loved you, and you just shut the door, and you wanted a do-over. You wish you could somehow do that over.
Yeah. Right. And I know Cheri knows lots of those moments too, where he was shouting out to me, and I was at such a loss as to what to do. And I think if the kid that bags my groceries at the grocery store had done that, I think I could have come up with, an idea of what to do or what to say or how to help in some way. But my own son, I couldn't touch it. And I often wish I knew then what I know now.
It sounds to me like one of the things both of you are saying is that when you have a relationship with this person, that you are seeing some cues that they're suffering and that they are withdrawing or they're in pain, and that sometimes, as Tamara is saying, that when you see that so much, then you actually become stunned by what you see. And then the other thing that Cheri is pointing out is, instead of allowing that sense of being stunned to make ourselves remain silent, to go ahead and speak up about that pain. And that by speaking up and by using the word suicide and by getting that out, what you're actually doing is taking the power away rather than allowing them to hold on to that thought, which could be very powerful. Does that sound like it's making sense? Or?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that when we let the person just think it and not put it out there on the table, it has a lot more power. When it's talked about as a fact, this is one of the things you're thinking about, what does this mean? It takes another whole level.
So it's like having a pressure cooker that you just let cook instead of letting out the steam.
Right.
That part of what we want to do in terms of helping other people is let out the steam, and then that can be helpful. Now, for me, another question here is, since people might be depressed for a period of time, will they ever get tired of us asking about suicide or about the type of pain that they're talking about?
I don't believe so. A person who is in pain and thinking about suicide, they can think about it almost all the time. And so our bringing up a few times, which to us is a lot, is very little in their world.
You know, and thanks for bringing that up. I actually had a friend of my son who died, had some difficult times before my son. And I talked to him, I said, you know, did Mike ever talk to you about suicide or anything? He goes, no, never. And I said, well, I don't understand that. And he goes, well, let me tell you, in my situation, there was barely ever an hour in my life for a couple years that I didn't think about suicide every hour of every day.
Wow.
And that was so intense for me to hear that. He's a wonderful young man. He's gotten his life all situated, if you will, and so I'm so happy for him. But I didn't realize how much that can be within somebody and
Yes, and then
overtake them.
And then when you talk about it, you break that circle thinking in their head.
Yeah.
You kind of like open the door and let some light in, and let's look about this in a variety of different ways.
Well, talk about letting light in, Cheri. This is so informative, and thank you so much for your perspective today, because, you know, I wish 11 years ago we absolutely didn't talk about suicide, and I honestly wish I had the words or the permission, you know, to speak up or to say something, because we can make a difference.
Right.
It all comes back to the listening again. And again, we just have a couple minutes left, and I want to ask Cheri, because we had a Dr. Long on from a couple weeks ago, works at Northern Illinois University, and he works with college students, and he said that he and nobody in his office would ever take on more than one or two persons contemplating suicide, because he said, as you referred to it earlier, Cheri, you can't leave it at the office. You take it home with you. And how do you deal with that on a daily basis, dealing with probably the most important thing in life?
Well, I agree with him. I try to take 2 or 3 at max. The problem is, you don't know when a person starts therapy it's one of my initial questions in a therapy session. So it's hard. I be sure if I have that I give myself time to rejuvenate, to look at my priorities, and keep believing for that person.
And is that a part of your initial session will be you'll come right out and ask them if they've had suicidal thoughts?
Absolutely. It's the initial interview. Mm-hmm.
And as an experienced therapist, do you feel you can gauge if they're lying to you? Because I have a feeling if you had said that to me, I would initially say no, even though I have had suicidal thoughts. I
don't gauge whether they're lying or not. I take the person who says, yes, I have, and know that we're going to deal with that right away. Take a person who's depressed and say, no, I'm not. I say, okay, maybe we're going to come back to this in a little while.
And again, sorry, go ahead, Mike.
You know, something else that came out of that show with Dr. Long was the how people who struggle with depression, how that can be a long-term piece for them. And I'm wondering if you can say a few words about that, because I think that's something Chuck brought up a little bit ago. And I think sometimes people get the notion that someone who is suicidal or depressed is kind of like a spur-of-the-moment thing. But what's that walk like for people that have depression and that are struggling with suicidal thoughts? Is it quick, dirty, and over, or is this different? And if so, how is it?
Well, again, it's a variety of people, but I think if you take the majority of people have been depressed for some time, aren't finding their way out of it, and it's growing. And so a suicidal thought starts to grow in there. Oh, I have a way out. I have a way to get over this.
And so when you say for some time, are you talking about a day? You're talking about 2 weeks? Are you talking
Months.
about months? So it couldn't necessarily be something that came on all of a sudden, but it could be several months.
Yes.
And that I would think then in that kind of situation that if you're in that person's life, you might be able to see some of the cues of loss that Tamara was talking about and that you were talking about, and that you might be able to take that opportunity to speak to that person. Does that make sense?
Yes. You would see them stop engaging in so many places, start avoiding hard situations, take the easy way out constantly, down.
And then what would you say to a parent or a loved one who sees a person suffering like that for a long period of time and they feel like they don't know what to do? What would you want them to do?
I'd want them to talk directly with the person and ask all those questions.
Okay.
How bad is this depression? Where's your...
I'm sorry, we're quickly out of time, but that's just what I wanted Cheri to end the show on, is what they should do. And we keep hearing the same reoccurring themes. Don't we listen closely, and don't be afraid. Mike, as you say it so well, what should people do?
Speak up. Don't remain silent.
Don't remain silent. All right, Zoe. Tamara, thank you so much. TamaraSutton.com is the website. People
Thank
can go
you,
there
everyone.
and visit with you. Chuck Seabrass, thank you as always, my friend.
Thank you, and WLBK and yourself for doing this with us every week.
Citizen Mike, thank you, and thank you for bringing us Cheri Auman, psychotherapist, right? We got that right,
Yes,
Cheri?
we did.
Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you, Cheri, for stopping
Good
by and
being
visiting.
here. Thank you.
And that's the Suicide Prevention Show for this week.